students. Over the years, every member of the Pro Audio Corner of the music industry have become family to me, and it's my job to bring the whole eclectic crew together. Each episode, I'll introduce you to one of these characters and open a window into my world of creating community in pro audio. Thanks for tuning in to One and Dunn. Hi, today we're welcoming Kelly Pribble. He's the Director of Media Recovery Technology at Iron Mountain, and he's also an inventor. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for coming today.
Hi, Karen. Thank you for the invitation.
Before we get into everything I like to talk about, can you talk a little bit about Iron Mountain and what Iron Mountain is? Everybody has heard of it, but a lot of people don't really know what it does.
Sure. Iron Mountain is a global company of around 26,000 students around Iron Mountain is a global company and a leader in boxes on shelf, digital storage, shredding, and all things storage globally. We have a division called Iron Mountain Entertainment Services, is where I work at. And basically what we do is we cater to the entertainment services of audio, video, film, record labels, estates, anything that has media, that's our division, and that's why we call it Iron Mountain Entertainment Services.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about your job? What is media recovery technology?
Yeah, sure. Basically what we're finding with media, as it's aging, we're starting to see it degrade and degradation happening just naturally. Also with improper storage of people storing it somewhere in a climate that causes mold. And so I'm the director of what we call media recovery technology, as I've created basically a system to recover tapes that may be damaged from mold or actually have a degradation issues, such as binding or adhesion syndrome or loss of lubricant. And what we're seeing now is we're starting to see tapes or mass media that is going into rapid decay. And we're talking stuff that's not really that old, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. Mm-hmm. These are master tapes of major artists that as we're starting to pull out to redigitize for something like Dolby Atmos. For surround sound, we're getting the original multi-tracks that we actually mix in surround sound that we're starting to have problems, and we're starting to see mass amounts of problems from all different levels of manufacturers. And so we created this division of media recovery technology that I created, and I actually have a patent on it, was just issued as well. And so that's what I'm directing, and I have a lab in my New Jersey studio that we basically go through and try to fix whatever we can for preservation of these classic and historic master tapes.
Now, I don't think very many people know that this even exists and that this is a process. So how did you get into this part of it?
Oh, sure. I made records up until about 12 years ago. I actually started in Nashville. I built quad studios in Nashville. I had 4 studios. I spent 10, 12 years there. I went to London and I made records in London, where I built a place called Kensington, where I had 8 studios. And after spending 10 years in London, I came back to the United States and started actually working for Iron Mountain at that time in the underground. And the underground is a old limestone mine in north of Pittsburgh. 3,000 people work underground every day. It's an underground city. And they had this digitization studio there, which started archiving. So really my archiving started in 2010 at Iron Mountain in the underground. And my first year, there was an incident that happened in South America in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And Iron Mountain asked me if I would go to Rio and basically head up a project that all these master tapes had gotten wet and gotten moldy. And there was not a lot of happy people about that. So I went down there and put a team together and started what I call remediation. That was really the beginning of me creating remediation, or the media recovery technology program that we now have, 10, 12 years later. And so I was a little bit of a tinkerer, always been a little bit of an inventor. And we had to come up with processes and machines and a way to clean these master tapes to be able to preserve them. And I was able to do that over a little bit of time and spent basically 3 years there. It took us about 6 years to get everything cleaned and remediated, but we were able to actually get everything done. And what became possible lawsuits went away because we were able to preserve everything. And these were classic masters of big Brazilian artists or Latin American artists. And so that's where my beginning of remediation started. And as I was in Brazil, another incident happened on the East Coast, and they asked me to come up and deal with that and manage that. So I was flying back and forth between South America and New Jersey. And so basically applying the applications that I had built and designed in Brazil and started them in New Jersey. And at the time, this was 2013, we didn't have a studio in New Jersey that supported New York City. We had warehouses, but we didn't have a studio. So I built the first studio, which I'm sitting in today. I can actually see New York City if I look to my left out the windows here. And so I'm that close to New York City. And so I built a lab about 6-7 years ago to basically start working with remediation and cultivating, preserving these master tapes that had issues. So everything that we find problematic around the world has been coming to me here. And we applied for a patent, like I said, a few years ago. And I just really actually received the patent last month after a 6-year.
That's great. Congratulations.
So, thank you so much. Thank you.
So there can't be very many people in the world that do this.
I'm finding that to be true. I find that to be true. Yeah, some of the things, obviously we've seen poor storage. I've had tapes come to me from Jamaica that were in public storage facilities that when we opened them up, they had salt residue really built up on them that were eating into the tapes. That's a storage issue. We've had a lot of artists actually, or estates, not really looking after the care of these master tapes, putting them in basements, attics and things like that. And over a period of time, they get moldy and they need remediating, and mold is not good for anything, and after time it eats into the tape. But what we're seeing even more alarming today is the degradation of tapes, particularly from the 1970s to the 1980s and 1990s.
Is it just age? Is it age? They're just old, so they're degraded, or is it a combination of things?
It's a combination of age and the manufacturing process. And what we're finding out now is, up until 1970s, the manufacture of tapes for a lubricant that was put into the recipe of the tape for it to go by a stationary head stack or something, used whale oil. And so that was banned in the late 60s, and obviously so. And so as of 1970, the early 70s, all the tape manufacturers globally had to use a new lubricant. And so they used a synthetic lubricant that now, 30, 40, 50 years later, we're starting to have major problems with. And that lubricant is starting to leach away from the tape. It's starting to come to the surface, which is giving us problems as we're trying to digitize the tape.
Is it bubble then?
It's actually kind of like a toothpastey, kind of waxy. And it's basically, it's a polyester carbon material that is part of the lubrication process of the recipe, and it's separating itself from the actual tape. And so it's coming to the surface. What's alarming about that is I've come up with a technique to clean that off to be able to digitize the tapes, but I've cleaned some tapes that 30 days later I went back to the original and they just as much was coming off, so it's in rapid state of decay. And we're starting to see this about age of 28 to 35 years old. Tapes from the 80s, 70s and 80s are starting to have that. And unfortunately, all the manufacturers use that same lubricant, so we're starting to see that across the board with multiple tape manufacturers.
So, and there's nothing you can do, right? Because all these tapes have that on it.
Yeah, a lot of these tapes we're starting to find have that. What we do know is some of the tapes I've worked with in the last year or so, we had digitized them in, say, 2004, 2005 that did not have this issue. We looked at the files, we looked at the notes of the engineers, we know that didn't have this issue. Fast forward another 15 years, all of a sudden we're starting to see it. So we're starting to see a key trigger point, so to speak, at 28 to 35 years that a lot of tapes are having this. And the fact that we're able to clean them and then it comes back, that's pretty alarming, because we assumed once we clean them, it was clean, we put it back in storage. So we know it's an evolving degradation of the tape, and so we don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. One of the things we're looking at is obviously digitizing in today's standards, but as we know, like Spotify and Dolby Atmos, they want a higher resolution than what CDs were. And right now we're doing pretty much 4 times the resolution of CDs for Dolby Atmos. And so as 5-10 years from now, it's going to be double that or triple that as well. So we're always going to want to go back to the master tapes and digitize those master tapes, because that's really the one and only master. So as we go along, what we're looking at doing now is maybe start copying those tapes to newer analog tapes in today's standards, so that if those decaying tapes are basically not playable in 10 or 15 years, that we may have a better copy than a digital copy. Because once we make a digital copy today, that resolution stays at today. We can't up-res it into a higher resolution in the future. So we always want to keep those original master tapes on hand as the resolution raises to go back to the original masters, hoping they're still able to be played and preserved.
Well, what's the difference between the tapes now and the tapes that are degrading. So what has changed in the formula, right?
The manufacturing process has changed. One of the things that we started realizing in the 80s when CDs came out, that lubricant we're talking about is part of the loss of lubricant issue. That's the reason why we have to bake tapes as well. And baking tapes is what happens over a period of storage time is just the humidity in the air, whether it's high humidity or low humidity, it absorbs into the tape. And we have to actually bake that tape or dehydrate that tape. And that's part of the process. They started changing that in the 90s. They started realizing what the issue was. So the tapes in the later 90s up into current days is a different process, a different formulation. So we think it's also the age time as well, as we're starting to see that age group of 28 to 35 years. So we're hoping if we get a tape that's manufactured today, that same period might be another 28 years. We're hoping. Time's going to tell because this is really new. And we're just starting to see these at the age of tapes from the 70s and 80s. And there's also an issue called adhesion syndrome that I started seeing in Brazil as well, where the tape on the edge is bound together. And as you unwind the tape to play it, it rips and it destroys the tape. That's also a natural degradation. And one of the things we do know is that's not the fault of a band or an artist or where it's stored. That's basically the natural degradation of the tape. That's not something that's been neglected. We're starting to see that as a manufacturing process going bad or in a state of degradation.
Okay, so if it tears, how do you recover it?
I don't. That's what's unfortunate. Once it tears, it's permanently damaged. What we have been able to do on a couple occasions are one of the edges is ripped, and basically the kick drum and the snare drum is on those edges that are damaged, and you can hear it audibly. But we've been able to find some other areas that weren't damaged, and in the digital world, cut and paste those instruments back in where they were and fix them digitally. But if it's a vocal or if it's an instrument that only plays once or plays a pass, and that's damaged, it's permanently damaged. So what we're trying to educate people on is doing things like this and showing the pictures and showing what this is like. So if you start seeing this, stop and do not go any further into the tape, and hopefully we can process it and get it unbound. And I've got a really good percentage, about 98% of a 2-inch master tape of getting them unbound once we know it's there. Once it's damaged, I can't fix it, but we've got a really good rate of recovery for those. And I built an entire process, and my patent actually covers that process that we actually created some time ago. So very pleased to be able to recover these master tapes of some major artists.
What's the most difficult recovery project you've worked on?
Oh, gosh. A few. Probably the tapes that came from a particular estate of an artist that had passed away. The tapes have been, we believe, in Jamaica or somewhere down on an island, and they were stored in a public storage facility that once we got them, they were covered in salt. And we had never seen that. I had never seen that, and the salt was eating into the tape. And they were bound as well. And so as we went through the process of, the salt actually made the edges bind. And as I'm going through the process of getting them unbound, we're putting them on the tape machine to roll them back to get at least one play, and they start disintegrating on the machine as we're winding them back to get one play. And so that was really challenging because that was new. That was something we had not seen before, that the salt residue had eaten so much into the tape that it was really damaging. And so what I really had to do was I had to build a machine to rewind the tape safely and not go through all the rollers of the tape machine. And actually, part of the process of getting unbound, I built this crazy looking Frankenstein looking machine that was able to do that and unwind the tapes. And I've probably done 3,000 tapes on that machine now to be able to safely rewind them to get one play. And that's our main goal, because unfortunately these are considered dead on arrival when they come in this state because of the issues and the binding issues that, if someone doesn't know this, they unwind it. And a lot of times, engineers will put a tape on, hit rewind and walk away. And the rewind speed is such a speed that it'll ruin a song within seconds. And you could ruin a tape within a minute or two. So we're trying to educate people like this is going on. And this is happening to major artists that are, it's not like I said, it's not their fault. This is just part of the degradation process. And we're trying to let people know, well, this is happening in certain areas of age that we're seeing. And so that was one of the worst ones. But the great thing about that one was that's where we discovered cutting and pasting the kick and snare drum. And so I was able to actually fix the audio on that because the vocal was in the middle of the tape, which wasn't damaged. The opposite edge was live shows of this artist. And what was great, these were in plain white boxes. There was no metadata, no track sheets, no dates of where these shows were. This was this artist, live shows in Europe. And what was great about those was this artist, we found out, never did the same set list twice, ever.
Wow.
And so there is this great website of every set list that he ever did and every show he ever did. And so we were actually able to go, each tape had about 5 songs on it in succession. We were able to go to that website and find every single date of every show.
Wow, that's
and
exciting.
date those shows, and basically gave it back to the estate, which were ecstatic because they didn't know what was on these tapes, and they were live recordings of this artist, and they were immaculately recorded. So we were able to actually save these for history, which were that was the hardest, but we're actually able to bring that out and save these with some new techniques and things like that.
How exciting! I mean, just that to be able to do that, to create systems to be able to recover that kind of work.
Right.
But on the reverse side, what happens if you fail? I can't imagine the stress. You get one chance to fix it, and if you can't, it's gone forever. So how do you deal with that part of it?
Well, I mean, you have to consider these kind of dead on arrival because when they get to that state, if there's no way we can processing, they're ruined. They're ruined as coming in. So it is a little bit stressful, but we've had good luck. I've had really good success spending a lot of time in South America, which was really challenging. We started seeing a lot of issues. We actually didn't see a lot of these issues in the United States until the last couple of years. So we originally assumed it was basically a regional situation in South America that had the adhesion syndrome and the loss of lubricant syndrome. And we didn't see that here until really the last 3 or 4 years. And then we're getting piles of them now. So it's a little stressful, but we've had good luck. We've had good success. And, it's trial and error. Each individual asset is individual to the issues. Once something's damaged, I can't obviously fix it once it's damaged with the adhesion. But with the loss of lubricant, we're able to remove as much as possible and actually transfer those tapes. And I've had a couple really good artists that allow me to talk about this publicly now, which we're proud of because for the longest time, no one wanted us to speak about these issues because I don't know if it was a guilt factor. They thought they had done something wrong. But a lot of these issues are not really anyone's fault. It's really a degradation of the master tapes.
So why don't you talk about some of the people who you can mention and just talk about different situations that you faced with those?
Sure. Bob Dylan is one of the first artists that actually let me talk about issues with fixing tapes. And we had a situation where I had done a presentation at the Library of Congress in 2018, and I talked about this, and I showed pictures, and George Massenburg was on my panel. And George basically begged me and said, please show these pictures because nobody's ever seen this. Show your machine, show what you're doing. And at the time, I hadn't received the patent. I was a little scared, and so I showed him. And George was really good about, hey, people, everybody put your phones away. This is really crazy stuff, so you just look at it. And about a year later, I had a guy call me and say, hey, I've got some tapes that look like something you showed at the Library of Congress. And he sent me some pictures, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty bad. And I said, well, who was the artist? And he said, it's Bob Dylan. And I said, well, let's talk to his archivist and let's see what we can do and come up with. And they were brought over to me, and there was 63 2-inch masters from 2 of his records, the Burlesque Empire record and Knocked Out Loaded record that he had done from 84 to 86.
Okay, so Bob Dylan, what does that do to you when you find out that it's the stuff that Bob Dylan has done?
It's a little scary, I will admit. It was a little like, okay, I can't mess up, I can't screw up. But by then I'd had so many tapes I had done. These were bound together. These were adhesion syndrome, and they were bound together. And by then I was pretty confident, okay, as long as the ones, they weren't damaged yet, we were able to get them unbound. But yeah, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure. And of course, it's Bob Dylan. And so the cool thing about that was we got a little bit lucky because as the tape gets further to the center of the reel, there's more pressure, which is harder to get unbound, that kind of thing. And we saw some results on some of the tapes that we couldn't get unbound, but what was great was they would let the tape roll for 2 or 3 minutes before they'd start recording. And so we got a little bit lucky with that.
Nice. Yeah.
The other cool thing about that was I learned how Bob Dylan recorded records, and it was cool because you're like in the room with him, and he would just be talking and start hitting a guitar lick and start playing something, and the band would join in, and that's a song. And so it was great to be kind of a fly on the wall, so to speak, in a Bob Dylan session. And this was 2 full records, so there was a lot of outtakes, there was a lot of banter in between, which is just amazing to hear that no one gets to hear. And you hear Bob talking and asking questions to the engineer and saying, hey, can you do this, and can you do this and do this? So it was a bit of pressure, but it was one of those that, it's one of my key mark things of my life that I could go, I actually made this happen, was able to preserve some Bob Dylan masters. I'm extremely proud of. So thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So, and you've worked with Rush, right?
I worked with Rush. Yeah. Rush is another one that let us talk about this on educational purposes, just so we could let people know these things are happening. And what was going on with Rush's tapes was the loss of lubricant. These were from the early 80s and the late 70s. And one of their biggest records is a record called Moving Pictures. And they were looking at doing the Atmos and getting files and basically archiving everything of their catalog. And those master tapes for Moving Pictures had the loss of lubricant. And so that they went to another studio, they called me and said, hey, we think another situation, we've seen your panels, we've seen your pictures, and we were able to clean those and actually transfer those. And I went to Rush and I said, look, this is a different issue of degradation. This is, I let him see the Bob Dylan articles that have been written about this, and it's been really good with the Bob Dylan situation. There's been a lot of articles written. We were in Reader's Digest in the UK talking about that last year. And I let Rush know, I was like, look, this is not your fault. This is not storage fault. This is the degradation of the tape. And if you'll allow me to talk about this, it's going to go a long way for people to understand, hey, we need to look at this issue, because if it's happening to Bob Dylan, it's happening to Rush, 2 different actual incidents or degradations. But they let me talk about this and talk about this in an educational setting, which is great for me because it's letting people know there are issues with major bands and major records. These are monumental records. And the fact that I'm able to talk about this, I'm so pleased, because for so long, no one would let me talk about it. It was just a hidden, and so it kept happening over and over and over, that people weren't really looking for these issues because it wasn't in the public. And so I'm just ecstatic, and Rush is one of my favorite bands in the world, and working on those records was just like crazy for me. That record in particular was a big record in my life. And to be able to listen to the multi-tracks and listen to how they made that record, probably I'm the only person that's ever been able to do that besides them and their producer back in the day. And so that was just ecstatic that I go, okay, I'm listening to them making the initial tracks and that kind of stuff. And so that's what makes my life and my job just wonderful and great, that I'm actually able to preserve the history and literally get an insight to how they made the records.
So what's the most important thing for you in this job? Like, why do you do it? It has to be part of you, like in your heart. Like it seems like more than just a job.
It's absolutely more than just a job. I mean, I made records up until 12 years ago, and I'm very happy to have made the records I made, and I love making records. And then I pivoted and went into archiving and preserving and working for a company like Iron Mountain. I'm as proud today as what I'm doing as I ever did. And for the records that I made, and the fact that I'm able to preserve history is just why I get up every day and why I come to work every day. And the fact that I get to work with some of the biggest artists in the world, and I get those original master tapes in my hand, and I'm putting them on tape machines that I used to make records on back in the day as well. And to still have that understanding of how tape machines work. The work I'm doing today, I'm very, very pleased at, because I'm preserving history for the next generations and generations and generations. And so it has changed my life a lot, to be honest with you, of how I look at history and how I look at things. And what's a little bit upsetting, I guess, to me, is you and I could go to a museum today and we can see a painting or a book that's 500 years old in pretty good shape. But I have tapes from 1985 that are falling apart. And that's alarming to me. That's history that we are not really grasping that's happening. And so I'm kind of on a quest to educate and to get the word out, the look. If we don't look at these things and look at them deeply, we're going to lose a lot of information and a lot of historical music and data and things like that.
So it doesn't matter whether you're a big band or some, famous band or just some small touring band. Everybody's going to face this issue, right?
Everyone's going to face this issue, particularly with the digital born age as well. And digital born, what I mean by that is everything went straight to a hard drive. It's not on a tape. And obviously we're seeing tapes that are having problems 70s, 80s, 90s. Pretty much everything before 1950s through the 60s is in pretty good shape. They have their own issues because of the formulation of how it was made. But we're also seeing, as an archivist, and what I do today is now we're seeing hard drives that won't spin up, and hard drives that will not. Basically, it was what we call born digitally. Everything was recorded to a hard drive without any other backups except another hard drive. And I had a hard drive of an artist come to me yesterday. That was the entire record of a record she put out in 2002. The case was broken. It would not even power up. And so we had to take that hard drive and find another compatible hard drive case and put that hard drive in just to be able to spin it up to then copy that drive. And it was a complete record.
Okay, so why is that so difficult to do?
What's happening with those are, it's a physical turntable, so to speak, that the hard drive is. And there was lubricant that made those things spin and made them spin easily. That lubricant is starting to harden and start to become pasty, and those drives are stuck. The problem I had yesterday was the actual power supply and the whole structure was dead. So it wouldn't even spin the drive at all. And once we kind of prepare when we get something like that is, let's have another drive ready if we get it to spin to transfer it immediately. Because we may only get one or two chances to spin a hard drive. On a major artist, a major record, the entire record was on there. The stems for 5.1 mixes were on that hard drive. Everything was on that drive. And if that drive gets lost or there's not a second drive that we can spin, that's gone forever. And
so,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so technology keeps moving forward, right? So how easy is it to find what age this disc was now to be able to transfer it?
Well, there was dates on it. It was 2002. I looked up the record. There was 19 songs on this record as well. And so that's a lot of, this was a major female artist. And what we're in fear of, which is really a big fear, a lot of us in the industry of archivists are going to fear, is drives from 1995 to say 2015. We're going to lose a lot of information if we don't start backing them up and start paying attention to those, because I've been given drives from 2007 of a particular TV show that was only on drives and neither drive would spin up. And so we're afraid we're going to have a black hole of information, of music, media, companies, backups, we're, across the board globally. We're afraid we're going to have a big black hole of information in 20 years. We're going to go, nobody realized we should have been taking those hard drives and spinning them off into a newer drive or an SSD or a tape-based LTO or something like that. And we're not talking about only the music business or the film industry. We're talking about every kind of business possible. That, the word is not out there that you need to get everything off your hard drives from this period, because we're starting to see that they're locked up and they're forever going to be lost. Now, data farm retrievals, to send a hard drive for someone to try to retrieve is very expensive. It's getting harder and harder.
Okay, so what do you recommend, and we'll just talk about music in this one. So what do you recommend for bands, anybody who's recording to hard drive now? What should they do so they're not going to have this issue?
Good question. Couple things. Metadata. Put on their drives what version of software you're using today. Put on there any information that in 20 years we can look at that drive and go, okay, how are we going to be able to retrieve that drive information? And metadata is, because we're dealing with tapes from the late 90s and the early 2000s that were early Pro Tool sessions, music sessions, and there's no information on them. So we don't know what version of Pro Tools it was. We don't know what software. We don't know what the software to back it up on that tape was. So we're guessing a lot. So the metadata that's on the case or on the drive or anything, in 20 years, we need to know what you did today to make sure we can recover that, because we're going to keep computers today, because in 20 years we're going to be on such different computers that's not going to be compatible to read what we're doing today. And we're seeing that today with stuff from the late 90s and early 2000s. We still have a G4 computer that's old, that was from that era, that we have to put those drives in, or we have to put those tapes in to be able to retrieve that data and bring it up to current data. And so that's the biggest thing, is information and metadata is what you did today. How are we going to be able to retrieve it in 20 or 25 years? And without that information, we may never be able to retrieve that data.
That's kind of scary to think about.
It's scary. Also look at, a couple things that are wise. If you're making a record, put copies in 3 separate locations geographically. So if there's a fire or there's an incident or a tornado or something, it's not going to destroy your entire project. That's something that's very important. Not everyone can do that, but that's very important for like a record label or an artist. If you're making a record, make sure you have 3 copies and separate them. And then as time goes on, keep updating them to the current drive or current tape drive, which is an LTO or something like that. We're on LTO 8s and 9s now, though we can't even read LTO 1s or 2s or 3s without those original machines to bring it up to date. So as the future goes, we have to still have those original machines and drives and computers, because there's not a one-fits-all today that will read something from the late 80s or 90s or the early 2000s. And so information is key to longevity of your files and your music and your art. And without that, we're starting to find we can't recover tapes because they didn't have a certain file that let us open up with software. And they just forgot. And there's a software called Retrospect that you would put it on a tape, and then you would have a disk that you would put into Retrospect software that says, it's this, here's how to open it, here's the key, and open it. And without that initial disk, we have to rebuild that system, and it takes forever to do, and we still may not be able to get it rebuilt correctly. And so all that information is extremely important for the future of keeping the art world going, of music and art, or anything digital. Anything digital, we need that information for the future of being able to retrieve that.
So you've got these old machines to be able to do this stuff. What happens if something breaks on one of your machines? How do you get parts still?
We have a graveyard of machines. We buy parts, we buy spare parts, we buy machines just for parts, because obviously a lot of this has not been made, particularly in the analog world. Analog machines haven't been made for about 40 years now. And so we buy machines, we keep spares. The other half of that is finding someone that knows how to work on these machines, maintenance. And unfortunately, when these machines were being used in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the guys that were working on those machines are either retired or they unfortunately have passed away. So we're trying to find a younger generation to be interested in keeping these machines up. And one of the things I'm doing is doing a workshop in June for archiving, but we're looking at doing a workshop for maintenance, to find students that could come to a studio like mine and work with our maintenance engineers to see if they want to look at preserving machinery that preserves history. And so that's a big part of the problem too, is keeping the machinery available and up and running and all the formats. And we're talking now, I mean, the machines I have literally to the left of me, I have probably 20 different formats of formats that from the 50s all the way up until the 2000s. And we're talking about multiple digital formats, multiple analog formats, 1 track, 2 track, 3 track, 4 track, 8 track, 16 track. All these different formats are still formats that need to be recovered or retrieved, or basically for Dolby Atmos, it could be a 16 track. I just did a 16 track tape a couple weeks ago, so I have to have that machinery to be able to recover those tapes properly. And so the upkeep of that and having the multiple formats is expensive, and the upkeep is expensive, but it's what you have to do to preserve the history for the future generations, is have the availability to do that.
So if anybody's recording and has that master tape now, what's the best way to store those so we don't have this issue?
In a cool, dry place. Basements are wet. Basements will cause mold. I can't tell you how many tapes I've gotten from artists that had them in their basement, or major film directors that had films in their basement. These are the master cuts, and artists that haven't been in their vaults for many years or whatever, and have issues of mold and things like that. And just proper storage. You can Google, tapes, what's proper storage. Usually 65 degrees with as low as humidity as possible is the best. That's not always convenient for everyone. So, or find some kind of storage that's climate controlled. Basically, there are public storage facilities that are climate controlled. But at the same time, this is your art. This is your legacy. And a lot of people up until now, when Dolby Atmos came out, didn't really think about why they would need to keep these multi-track tapes intact for the longest time, until now a new format came out. That's possibly going to happen again in 10 more years. We don't know what the future holds. That it could be something entirely different, that we're going to have to go back to those original masters and rediscover them, and probably deal with the issues again with loss of lubricant if we can play those tapes in the near future.
Okay, so I saw 60 Minutes did a piece on the Prince vaults and talked about Iron Mountain. I know that's out there in the public. So can you comment on that?
I can tell you, look at the 60 Minutes piece. It's really enlightening on what Prince was doing and the issues that were surrounded by Prince in his vault. I cannot comment today on it. We're about to get permission and be able to show some amazing things of recovery, but I can't comment on that particular artist as of today. But I just encourage anyone to Google 60 Minutes Prince and look at the piece, because it's really great. It's really enlightening, and it does talk about us, but I can't comment any more than that today.
So we should have done this podcast later.
Possibly. Well, maybe by the time this airs, we'll have permission. I don't know. I'm still working on it. I've been doing some amazing stuff, but like I said, we can't comment today. But we hopefully will be able to very soon.
Okay. Can you tell me what you're doing for the Sun Records catalog?
I can briefly. Sun Records is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. It started in 1952 in Memphis. It was sold in the mid to late 60s, I believe, to a guy named Shelby Singleton in Nashville, and it all moved to Nashville. And it has been in that building, I believe, since the mid 60s. And a company called Primary Wave, it's public knowledge, bought Sun Records, and in the basically to preserve Sun Records and the legacy of Sun Records. And so there's going to be something coming out later this year about the anniversary of that. I can't talk too much about it, but this company has bought it to preserve the legacy of Sun, and hopefully we're going to see some really cool stuff coming up soon. And that's about all I can say right now. Sorry.
Okay, this makes me crazy.
Sorry.
I want names, I want details.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned. All I can say is stay tuned. What's happening, I can say this is really public knowledge as well, is there are a couple companies like Primary Wave, Iconic Artist Group, I think it's Hypnosis, that are buying catalogs. And they're buying catalogs of artists. It's very public knowledge. And they're buying them to preserve the history of these artists. And one of the things that they're finding out is, I've been on this campaign talking about the degradation, remediation for 4 or 5 years. And they're actually starting to notice that, oh my gosh, there possibly could be something going on with these tapes we're buying, and we're spending millions of dollars for it. So I've been in contact with a lot of these people about looking at their master tapes and making sure we're going to be able to preserve them. So what's good about that is it's kind of come full circle for me. And preaching this, preaching to the gospel of saying, look, something's happening to your tapes. Please take notice. It's happening to Bob Dylan. It's happening to Rush and it's degradation. And it's all these issues. So I've been in contact with a couple of these companies, and they're a little bit nervous, but they also know they're in good hands, that we're going to be able to hopefully preserve these master tapes and get the value of what they're paying, because they're spending a lot of money for these master tapes. But it's great because they're spending money to preserve these masters and preserve the legacy of these artists. And for the longest time, we're talking about estates that these tapes were in basements. They weren't really well protected. They're being pilfered, and these companies are coming in, spending a lot of money to preserve these. And that's for the future of the history of the legacy of these artists. So I'm happy to be part of that and part of the legacy of making that happen.
Okay. So if we have some audio engineer students listening to this or watching it and they think, well, this sounds pretty cool, what skills and what kind of temperament do you need to be able to be a successful recovery
Archivist?
Archivist, yes.
You know what? A lot of it has to do with passion of preserving history. One of the things, what we deal with old machinery and having, the passion to be able to learn this old machinery and have the passion to preserve music. And, I actually last week was on a road show. I spoke to 6 universities in 5 days, all in the Midwest.
Wow.
And I spoke to younger students and showed them what I'm doing, and to see their light up and go, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was a career or a job or this is even happening. And so that was part of why we did what we did, because we're looking for, Iron Mountain IMES has studios pretty much all over the world, that we're looking for the next generation to teach this, because we have around 40 million assets, we believe, of media globally in our in our warehouses or our vaults.
40 million?
Yeah, we think it's somewhere around that. We can't tell. We have so many we can't tell. But I've heard it anywhere from 20 to 40 million. And so all of this has to be archived at some point, or it's going to be degraded to the point it's going to be lost in history. So what I'm doing is I literally went to 6-7 universities last week, one a day, spoke, showed my pictures, showed what I do. And we're going to actually do a workshop in June that I'm going to have 6 applicants coming to me for the first kind of pilot program to show them what archiving is about. I've got 48 people signed up already for 6 applications. Wow. And so it's working.
That's great.
It's working. It's great. And so it's just having some knowledge. I'm all over the web on some interviews and pictures and things like that as well. And so look at what we're doing and see if you're interested. And then apply to us. I'm trying to go this year and do student interactions and workshops. And one of the things that we realized, all the schools I had went to, they all had music business programs, and they all had studios, and they all had tape machines. Some were stored in the closet. And when they realized, oh my gosh, this is actually a career, we might want to pull these back out. And so I was asked to come back. We're working on some things probably in the summer or for the fall semester to maybe do some hands-on workshop boot camps at these schools, bring out these tape machines and actually start showing hands-on. And it's not really anyone's fault that they're not teaching it, but they kind of realize that like the future is digital, future is recording engineers and producers and this and that, which is great. But there's very few jobs in those positions available.
Right.
And we're trying to show them, like, this is history. This is something that if we don't jump on today, we're going to lose in not too long from now if the degradation keeps happening. And so by me going to these schools last week really showed me a lot that there's an interest. And I think, when I come back to Iron Mountain, I said, look, I spoke before 140 students last week. That's a lot of people in 1 week. Yeah. And we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to actually try to see if we can build workshops and boot camps, maybe at the schools or here at my studio. It's a pilot program, and we realize if we don't try, we're not going to be able to get the next generation to do what we want to do. So my campaign now is to get out there and get known for preserving history and find the next generation, and hopefully get them interested in this. And we had some great feedback. I can't tell you how many people went to me and said, man, this is amazing. I had no idea this was a job or a career. And when you start showing history, very few people go, I'm not interested in that. And showing them something they didn't realize was out there. And obviously the faculty didn't realize this is happening. And so this is a new thing that we're actually trying to get out and get known. And going to these universities last week was really eye-opening for me, because we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know if we'd show interest. But we were at Ball State with David Letterman's alma mater, which is a big communication building, and seeing the people that was coming to speak at his school were major people in the news business and things like that. And then I'm coming there going, hey, I'm showing you something you had no idea about. And it really lightened a lot of people up, and I'm getting great feedback, and we've got a lot of people applying. So that's kind of hopefully the future of education, of what we do and showing what we do and getting out there and getting hands-on and going like, this is a career. We have jobs available. We're going to continue with the amount of what we have and what other record labels have and what other vaults have, we have to get onto it pretty soon, and we need that next generation to help us.
Okay. Well, hopefully people will hear this and contact you and get more people
I hope
into this.
so. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, so it's best to get me on LinkedIn.
Okay. We're going to change this up a little bit, just talk a little bit more about you. It's never, ever a straight line in this industry. It seems like people start one place and end up somewhere completely different. So,
right.
And your career path has been always in music, but different areas. And it's so hard for some people to change and to, it's like you had a career, you stopped, changed it, went to a different career, stopped, changed it, went to a different one. So what is that process? How did you decide, from point A to where you are now?
Right. Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to know how to record music. It was just a passion of mine. I always wanted to know how to record music. I wasn't able to buy studio gear or anything like that, and so I was always around concerts, and I actually went to a concert in Southern Illinois where I grew up, and it was a Tom Petty concert, and I knew how to sneak into the arena, and I kept getting caught and get thrown out. And me and a friend of mine got thrown out 3 times, literally. And a bus driver behind the facility honked at me and said, "Come over here. Where are you? I keep watching you guys sneak in and get thrown out." And he was actually from Nashville. And I was like, I want to record records. I want to know about recording. I'm in Southern Illinois. I'm far away from any business. And he said, "Have you heard about Belmont?" And I said, "No, I have not." And he says, "Belmont is recording school in Nashville. It's A to Z." And that was, I think, on a Friday or Saturday night. On Monday, I went to my counselor at high school and said, "Where's Belmont? Tell me about Belmont." And it was all things recording. And so I actually went and visited Belmont my senior year of high school. I saved up enough money to provide 1 semester, room and board, and never left. And so that got me really interested in recording because I had never been into a proper recording studio. There's a record producer named Scott Hendricks was my first teacher. And Scott was a major engineer in town at one of the biggest studios, and I started interning with Scott when I was 18, and interned with him for a couple years. I wanted to get around Nashville, and while I was still in Belmont, I interned with an independent engineer who we went to a different studio pretty much every day, and I learned about Nashville, and I started meeting all the record producers and all the musicians. And from there, about 3 years later, he and some investors bought the old Quadraphonic Sound Studios in Nashville that had been closed, and I went from an intern to opening up Quad as the manager, the janitor, everything all above. And I was the only guy there. And so one of the records that I had, we did, and I bought a vintage Neve console for $23,000. No one wanted it, and that console is so sought after now. It's probably worth $300,000. So I wish I still had it. It's still in location. So I started Quad in 1988, and as one room, and I got so busy. Charlie Daniels came and did one of his records with us. That record went gold. And what was great about Charlie was he knew everybody in the music business. And when Charlie's in Nashville, because he's known for touring, when he's in Nashville, everybody would come and hang out with Charlie. And so I got to meet Leonard Skinner. I got to meet all these bands that wanted to come and see Charlie and just say hi. And from there, I got so busy that first year that I was turning away so much work that I went to my investors. I went to the building next door. I drew it up drafting wise, and I said, I can buy the building next door and build 3 more studios. And so I went and borrowed, with their credit, a lot of money and bought the building next door and built 3 more studios. So as of 1990, I had 4 studios in Nashville that I was running. And one of the cool things about what we did, it didn't work everywhere, was we had 1 kitchen with 4 studios. So I had 2 tracking rooms and 2 overdub rooms. And everybody had to meet over coffee. And so that was unique to Nashville because most of the studios had private lounges for each room.
Right.
And we became just known for like, oh gosh, I can meet another session. I could see somebody else from another session, and they might ask me to come on. And at one point we had Whitney Houston and Leonard Skinner in at the same time, which got news all over the world. Like, wow, that's a place. There's 2 artists working together, which is kind of cool. And so that became this community vibe. And so, I was running Quad for another 10 years, which was 4 studios. We were doing a lot of big records. And a producer from Sweden had worked at Quad then and had moved to London and had asked me to come to London in 2000, said, let's build a Quad format in London. And so I went, and over a couple of years, we built 8 studios in London, in a place called Kinseltown, and we built one kitchen because we wanted the vibe of community. And so that really hit big in London. So we would come in and have people sitting at the kitchen table because it was the only common area from all over the world, which was cool. They were like, I want to be part of this. I've heard about the studio. I'm a songwriter, or I'm an artist. And it just became this great community feel. We had people like Yusuf Islam, Cat Stevens work with us. We built him a studio. And so we had this great facility in London. And I spent 10 years there, and I started missing home, and I started missing my family after 10 years and being away from family. And so I came back to the US and dealt with some family issues and realized it's like I wasn't going to go back to London, and basically found Iron Mountain within a month of coming back to the US. And I started in the underground that I was talking about, and then they sent me to Brazil, which I spent a better part of 3 years. And then while I was in Brazil, I'm coming back to New Jersey, fixing issues, and then I built the studio I'm sitting in today in New Jersey. And so that's kind of how my career has been, like decade.
Okay. So I have 2 questions.
Sure.
One is, community is really important to me, and this pro audio community I love, and that we talk about it in all my podcasts. So I want to know what your definition of community is.
Community is, well, it's mainly been in the studio environment for me, is when you have multiple different rooms working on multiple different projects, and those people get together or see each other and say, hey, who are you? What are you doing? Come and listen to this. Come and check this out. You want to play on this? And it's basically over coffee, or it's over a kitchen situation to where there's a common ground. And community is people getting together to maybe write songs together or do art together. And it's all about art and music. And I call, people go, well, explain to you what a mix is. And a mix to me is a picture painted with sound. And for someone, to understand what audio is, or what I do as an engineer, and what I did making records, was we would paint a picture of sound. We would add a little bit of it. So the community, to be around that, is very important, to be, having a good vibe and hitting, or, bouncing things off, ideas off of different people in that environment was great. And it works really well I did it in Nashville, I did it in London, and I just did it in New York City. And last summer, Martin Sharaffe, the producer from London that I built the 8 rooms with, we just built a facility in New York City where there's 6 control rooms and 1 floor, a 6th floor of a 12-story building on Irving Place, which is a very cool part of Manhattan. Irving Plaza is across the street, which is a great venue. And we put together a studio that I helped put together, and there's 1 kitchen. And I was there a month ago writing some songs with a songwriter, and I found that vibe for the first time in a long time, that this community environment is happening, and people are walking around saying, who are you? Come listen to what I'm doing. What are you guys doing? And,
very cool.
And so it's the hottest place in New York City right now, and it just opened in November. And so that's my definition of community within the music world. Okay.
So the other question I ask everybody is, and it'll be interesting to hear your answer. So how do you have a balanced life? So your work-life balance. What do you do other than work?
Oh, that's a hard one. I work a lot. You know what? I'm an inventor. Like I said, I just got my first patent. I have a wood shop and a machine shop in my garage at my house, and most of my weekends are there, tinkering or building or creating something. I went to mechanical engineering school for 5 years at nighttime, 1 class a semester up until COVID, to learn how to work with metal, because I needed to build machines I needed to do for remediation. So my weekends are my 2 garage doors open with a fan on and the sun shining and a breeze blowing, and I'm in heaven. I have an old Coke machine from 1967 that you open the door and pull up bottles. And it still works, and it's really cold, and I have some really nice cool beverages in there, a couple adult beverages in there as well. So that's my paradise, is really just, I could just be sitting in my chair looking out the 2 garage door windows and going, okay, this is paradise for me. So that's kind of my go-to place for relaxation. I'm being creative, but at the same time, I may just sit there and drink a beer or drink a cold Coke in a bottle. It's just, that's kind of where my relaxation is. Good food. I love good food as well. So.
Well, that leads me into my last question and my favorite. And we always talk about food because who doesn't love food?
Yeah.
So we've never met in person.
Right.
So let's say we're gonna get together.
Okay.
And we can meet wherever you want. So where are we going to go eat dinner? What are we eating? What are we drinking? What music are we listening to? And what are we talking about? Go.
Okay. There's a place in Paris. I spent a lot of time in Paris, where the Cathedral Notre Dame is. If you've never been there, the Cathedral Notre Dame is on an island that splits the Seine River. And there's a point at the end of the split on that little island where it's bohemian. Everybody goes. There's a lot of bohemian people go there with a bottle of wine, a fresh baguette, French, maybe some blue cheese or some sausage, and they go there and they sit, and you're in the middle of Paris, and the water's going around you, and you're drinking the best wine, a Bordeaux, for €5 that you got at a corner store, a fresh baguette, some blue cheese, and there's people sitting around with dogs and guitars, and you're watching the sunset. That would be my go-to place. And we don't speak the language, we're just gonna smile a lot.
And what are you and I going to be talking about?
How great it is to be in that moment. How great it is to relax for a moment with a beautiful bottle of wine we spent no money for, because we're in Paris, and what great, this piece of bread is the best piece of bread, and this cheese is amazing. and just what it is to settle for a minute and be in this environment surrounded by the people doing the exact same thing. And we're in the middle of Paris. You're seeing the buildings, you're seeing the boats go by us in the water. It's not fancy.
It sounds wonderful.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I want to take you there because it's been a long time since I've been there. And it's one of my just favorite places in the world that is just relaxation, and everybody is there to do the same thing. And it's just one of the greatest places in the world to me.
Okay, let's figure out how to do it.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that.
Thank you, Kelly, so much. This has been great, and I'm totally behind the whole restoration process. I think music history is so important, so anything that I can do to forward that cause,
Great.
I'm definitely there for it.
Great. I think I sent you a workshop flyer that if you can post it sometime for the workshop that's coming up, that would be great. It's going to be in June. We're taking 6 applicants. We're going to do a hands-on workshop, and if this works, we figure it will work, we're going to do more. And we're going to do different locations. We may do one on the West Coast, we may do one in London. So that's basically our effort to try to teach this to the next generation, to keep this preservation going of the world's history. So that would be great.
We'll do. We'll do something.
Great.
Okay, thanks so much,
Thank you
Kelly.
so much.